So very often while reading those books, I wanted to bail. I just wanted to stop. I, at some points, wanted to throw them out of the window. Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today, I'm here to do my worst books of 2019. Bad books remind us of how wonderful it is when we read a book we truly love. So before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank the authors of each and every one of the books that I discussed in this video. Let me begin with a book that I read recently, Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips. This is a debut novel, so I'm willing to be generous here. For a debut novel, it's not bad, okay? But I read a whole lot of good novels in 2019. So I just want to say something, before going into Disappearing Earth and any of the other books, is that I read a lot in 2019 and I read a lot of really great books. In fact, I've already talked about them in a previous video. I'm grading on a curve here, so don't feel too discouraged if you love Disappearing Earth. It is not a bad book in itself, I guess, but when put together with all the books that I read in 2019, yeah, it was one of the worst ones, if not the worst. So in her first novel, Phillips talks about missing girls, right? So the book begins with a couple of girls who have gone missing. You think you are reading a mystery, you think the plot is going to revolve around that, and you are looking for clues as a reader. You're trying to work out who and why took these girls away and whether they're dead or alive. That's what you start to think. That's what I started to think, but I'm not big on detective novels or that kind of fiction, so I didn't really know what was going on, and I think that worked actually in my favor because I'm not au fait with all the techniques and all the plot contrivances, all the tropes, all the cliches of the genre. And this book is not a genre book, so it's just as well, and that's why I say that it worked in my favor, because I didn't have any of my expectations smashed, simply because I didn't have any. So what is my problem? What is my beef with this novel? Well, this novel is set in the peninsula of Kamchatka. This peninsula, it's on the far side of Russia, and we're dealing here with a post-Soviet Russia, and that's really important and really key in this book. Now, why would that be a problem? Well, Julia Phillips, she's not Russian. She's writing about something that she has no apparent connection to, which is fine. You can do that. But will it work? Well, in this case, it didn't. Writers can write about anything they choose. They can set their books in Mars, in Russia. It's not really a matter of Julia Phillips being allowed or not to write about anything she wants and set her books wherever she wants to set them. She's free to set them in Russia, but will they work? Will it work when an American writer sets a book in Russia? It could. In this case, it doesn't, and let me tell you why it doesn't. Number one, because the setting is just an exotic setting. She clearly has no real sense of the place. It's just there to other and the people and the place, and to make it seem exotic to more Western readers. So she's writing and she's thinking of a Western audience, an American audience like herself, and that really shows. So therefore, she's doing a disservice to that place, and it's kind of, I'm not going to say it is offensive, because I would have to be Russian to feel offended by this. It doesn't offend me, so I don't know if it is offensive, but it just doesn't work, and it does do a disservice to the place that she's setting her book at. And setting is so important. Setting is one of the most important things in a book. It's incredibly important, and if the setting just doesn't work, if it just doesn't come to life, then you're gonna lose me, and that's what happened with this book. And to me, I am not American, but I do read a lot of contemporary American literature, and the characters, every single character in this novel just sounded like an American character. So I kept thinking, why not set this in Wisconsin or in Kansas, or I don't know, somewhere upstate New York, anywhere you are familiar with as a writer. It would have rung more true, and therefore it would have been more satisfying as a novel. And that was my biggest problem with Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips. I had a lot more problems with Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, which is my second worst book of the year 2019. It is true that this short novel has a very exciting start, very promising, It's set in the late 20th century. Sylvie, the main character, is a teenage girl. She's a very appealing character. You empathize with her. You're with her along the way. You want to get on this ride with her to discover what's going on. Sylvie's father is this asshole who's an amateur archaeologist. He's particularly interested in the Iron Age, in Iron Age Britain. This is an English novel, and it's set in England, in the north of England, if I'm not wrong. And so the father goes on these amateur expeditions because he's obsessed with Britishness and the origin of Britishness, and he's willing to take the origins of Britishness as far back as the Iron Age. I mean, is it crazy or what, you know? He doesn't like Britain as it is in the late 20th century. He doesn't like the multiculturalism. So he got, because the history of Britain is the history of multiculturalism, it's the history of empire, it's the history of countries that were colonized and those people then move into Britain, people from Britain move into other countries. You know, that's a history of Britain. So he has to go for hundreds of years, really. So he has to go as far back as the Iron Age to find a pure, quote unquote, moment where he can be comfortable with, because that's the ideal society for him. So it's totally bonkers. And you do feel for his daughter, Sylvie, the protagonist of this book. So it doesn't take a scientist or well, not really a scientist, a literary critic or an expert to really work out that this novel is a fable about Brexit. I mean, it's so obvious that the guy wants a pure Britain. And in the last few years, because of Brexit and everything that's going on around it, you know, a lot of people have been preoccupied for what being British, what being English, particularly being English. This plays to that. It's a very timely novel, although apparently has nothing to do with Brexit. In fact, it's set way before Brexit. It's set, like I said, in the late 20th century. But to me, it is clear that it's a fable about Brexit. I think it's a little bit too soon to judge books based on that. I think it's a little bit too soon to know if a Brexit novel really works. I think we need a lot more distance from Brexit itself. I mean, first of all, we need Brexit to happen or not or whatever, but we need some closure with that, and then I think writers could write about it, or we as readers could judge. I don't know what you think, but I think it's a little bit too soon. I think there have been a lot of novels about Brexit, definitely this one, and also Ali Smith's Quartet, Seasonal Quartet. It's all about Brexit too. And sometimes I wonder if it isn't a little bit too soon to write about that. You know, we maybe could use a little bit more of historical distance to get into that. But maybe it's just readers. Maybe I need more distance from it before I can judge a novel set in Brexit. This novel was very promising. Ghost Wall started off really solidly, but then it kind of fell apart and it went bonkers towards the end. And that's why, to me, it's one of the worst books I read in 2019. Okay, another fable about Brexit, or rather about Britain, really. This one is not really about Brexit, it's more about Britain in general. In Lenny, the setting is rural England. So we're talking about the rural England that it's really commuter territory. So people who live in little villages, but really they go and work in the city. That's interesting. I am familiar with that kind of side of British life, having lived in one of London's suburbs for a couple of years in a past life. So yeah, all of that rang true to life and it was interesting. Now, the problem with the novel is that it's told through a symphony of different voices. Some of those voices worked better than others, and the voices that I was more interested in become muted as the narrative progresses, so I lost interest and I thought the novel was a bit of a mess because of that. Ultimately, my problem with Lenny was that it was way too experimental in a way that didn't work. I don't mind experimental fiction. I expect new things from fiction. I get tired of the same old thing. So I'm all for writers experimenting. This one, I think, got a little bit out of hand, a little bit too experimental for my tastes. But the most disappointing novel for me this year was The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. Now, this book was a huge disappointment, not because it's terrible. It is really not terrible. I really wanted to love it. This is today my first Deborah Levy's book, and I really wanted to love this, so I was really disappointed and heartbroken when I didn't. Again, this book is very topical. Walls. We keep hearing about walls. And this novel happens, it's also a Brexit novel of sorts, But part of it, most of it happens right before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And of course, the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. So 2019 was the anniversary, was the 30-year anniversary of that fall. Now, the novel is also set in part the day after the Brexit vote in 2016. There's nothing round about that date. But, you know, I think Deborah Levy wanted to draw parallelisms between the two events. I think they're kind of forced. I think the Brexit thing is a little bit shoehorned in, and I could have done without it. I could have done, and I would have preferred, a novel about the Berlin Wall. I mean, the novel is not really about that, but it has that as a backdrop, and I think I would have liked it if it had focused just on that. Saul Adler, the protagonist of The Man Who Saw Everything, is a very attractive character, very appealing character in many ways. He's an example of a kind of masculinity that is no longer culturally relevant, but if you go back and watch music videos from the 1980s, particularly by British bands, you'll see the kind of man that I'm talking about. But think David Bowie, maybe David Bowie would be the best model, but there would be others out there. So he's a character that we're perhaps not so familiar with in this day and age, but because the book is set in the 1980s, at the end of the 1980s, it makes sense. So he has a fraught relationship with his father. He lost his mother when he was younger, and he holds on to a pearl necklace that he insists on wearing all the time, no matter where he goes, even when he goes to East Germany. So the book, it's an interesting commentary there on different kinds of masculinity. The book has some interesting set pieces. It just didn't come together in the end, and I was hugely disappointed. But the good news is that it hasn't put me off reading more books by Deborah Levy. So I'm really looking forward to reading more from her this year. So come back here because I shall be talking about Deborah Levy in the future. And again, if you have any books to recommend by her, let me know in the comment section down below. And my final book is the Topeka School. I made a whole series of videos with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts about this book. So if you want to see my opinion in more detail, I suggest you check out the videos. Also, you know, Sarah's opinions are really interesting, more interesting than my own, and we both agreed that it wasn't a very good book for similar reasons, although we both developed them in different ways over a series of 3 videos. So go check them out. But if you don't want to do that and just want to get a sense of why this book disappointed me, well, The Topeka School by Bern Lerner is a look at toxic masculinity and debate culture in the US. That's what it is. It's autofiction, so Bern Lerner uses a character called Adam, and he's his alter ego, okay? But he doesn't just use Adam's voice, there are different voices. The book changes perspective, and it goes from different points of view all the time, but always staying in the first person singular, but just from different characters. The problem is that some voices are stronger than others, so to me, some of the voices in the book were very weak and not convincing enough, while others were very strong. And because the novel wanted you to be, or wanted me to be, interested in all the voices equally, and I guess particularly interested in Adam's voices, which I thought was one of the less interesting ones, then it's when it lost me. At the end of the book, Adam, who's the example of toxic masculinity in this book, not the only one, but the main one, becomes redeemed. But I don't think the redemption was earned. And I wasn't convinced by it, and I would have liked to see that character development, that character arc more fully developed in the narrative, and that's why The Topeka School is one of the worst books I read in 2019. So very often while reading those books, I wanted to bail. I just wanted to stop. I, at some points, wanted to throw them out of the window. But ultimately, I'm happy I didn't. I'm happy I soldiered on. Some of these books I read with other people, like The Man Who Saw Everything, I read with Sean the Book Maniac. The Topeka School, like I said, I read with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts. Those 2 buddy reads were amazing, were great. So I'm thankful that I was able to read those books with people. So don't be discouraged. These books could be good. You know, it just depends on your own perspective, how you approach books, what you want from them, what expectations you have, you know, that all jazz. So let me know what you think about my choices. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree? Do I think I got it right? Do you think I was way off the mark with some of them? Let me know your opinion on any or all of these books in the comment section down below. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's talk about books. This channel is here. I am here to foster conversations about books. So even if you don't agree, don't feel that you cannot let me know. As long as you're respectful and you can argue your case respectfully and articulately, I'd love to hear it. Let's talk about books in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye bye.